My name is Daphne Rabinovich, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, offering a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the world of book publishing. I'd like to welcome tonight's panel, beginning with Alana Wilcox, publisher at the Toronto-based Theytus Books. Alana will moderate tonight's panel. Joining her are Graham Angus from Theytus Books, Nurjehan Aziz from Mawenzie House Publishers, Jared Bland from Penguin Random House Canada, Tori Elliott from the West Coast Publishing House TouchWood Editions, Brian Lamb, president and publisher of Arsenal Pulp Press, and Robin, Philpot from the Quebec-based Baraka Books. Please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit all of your questions. They'll be put to the panel during the last 15 minutes of tonight's broadcast. So I'm as eager to get to it as you are. So without further delay, please welcome our panelists and tonight's conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to learn all about how you can get published. I think maybe we'll have broken the Zoom record for most number of bookshelves in the backdrop of Zoom settings, which makes me very happy. Please think about questions that you want to ask. The last 15 minutes, as Daphne said, we'll be answering your questions. Hopefully we'll have answered them all by the time we get there, but feel free to put them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. Please, no pitching specific manuscripts. It's not really the time or the place for it. So this panel is a pretty incredible collection of publishers and a real illustration of the fact that Canada is home to such an amazing range of brilliant publishers, all different sizes and locations with different tastes, different mandates, different ways of doing things. And I'd love to just go around and for each of you to just give a very brief overview of what your publishing company does. Graham, we'll start with you.
Hello. Oh, thank you for having us here. Allow me to represent Theytus Books. Theytus Books Limited is an all Indigenous owned and operated publishing house. We've been around since 1980, and that actually gives us the distinct honor of being the oldest in North America. And we're here to preserve the voice of our authors. There was a need was discovered. Well, not really discovered, but there was talk in the 80s. Oh, at any rate, sorry, I forgot I'm supposed to be brief. I could go on for hours.
All right. You're cutting in and out a little bit, Graham, so I'm not sure if you're done.
Sorry, we're all cutting in and out as well. I apologize if it's my internet connection.
Okay, well, we'll move ahead to Nurjehan.
At any rate, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nurjehan Aziz, a publisher at Mawenzie House Publishers, based here in Toronto. Our vision and mandate at Mawenzie is to publish writers from non-Western traditions and cultures, Canadian writers who come from those cultures, specifically from Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, the Near East. But you know, I should qualify that and say that it's mainly people from those, writers from those backgrounds, but not exclusively. And I myself have been in publishing for 40 years now, in one form or another. And that's it for now.
All right, Jared.
Hey, I'm Jared Bland from Penguin Random House Canada. Still learning to use the mute button, apparently. Yeah, I want to say Penguin Random House is the largest publisher in the country. We're home to, I believe it's right now, 8 different divisions, and that's adult publishing, children's publishing, and we publish across probably almost every category you can imagine. Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, cookbooks, lifestyle, wellness, picture books, manga, graphic novels, everything. So yeah, bit of everything. Thanks, Alana. Thanks for having us.
Tori.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Tori. I'm the publisher of TouchWood Editions, as mentioned. We're an independent publisher based in Victoria, and we operate on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen peoples. We have a legacy of publishing regional history and nautical memoir, but over time, we've evolved to focus mostly on food and wine books, including cookbooks and culinary narratives. Sometimes we do regional food guides, and we also have a literary imprint called Brindle and Glass, under which we publish Canadian literature, sometimes short stories and memoir.
Great. Brian?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Lamb at Arsenal Pulp Press in Vancouver. We've been in business since 1971, and with a particular focus on LGBTQ+, and BIPOC authors, although not exclusively. We publish in a number of different genres, fiction, poetry, cultural nonfiction, children's and young adult literature, and graphic novels. And all of our books share in common an aspiration to create meaningful social and political change. And thanks for having me too.
And last but not least, Robin.
All right, I'm with Baraka Books of Montreal. We've been around since 2009, and our goal is to live up to the name Baraka. Baraka is one of these cross-cultural international words where we try and bring voices that are not heard elsewhere. And we also have an imprint called QC Fiction, which is Quebec literature in English translation. Younger authors, less known, and new translators, run by Peter McCambert. And so we publish about 10 books a year, fiction and nonfiction at Baraka, fiction in translation at QC Fiction. So we have to be very selective about what we're publishing.
Thank you, everyone. That's a really great introduction to what you all do. I want to start by noting that publishers, we're all pretty lousy at promoting ourselves. We spend all our time and energy promoting our books and our authors, and we don't always talk a lot about what we do. So it's lovely to have this opportunity to share how publishing works. But it does mean, I think, that sometimes the work of publishers is a little bit opaque to the readers and even sometimes the writers. You know, on TV and movies, we're like drinking 3 martinis at lunch and schmoozing with famous authors. But I think in reality, for me anyway, publishing is really 90% spreadsheets. So before we get into the mechanics of choosing or talking about how we choose the books that we choose, I'd love to hear what each of you, the one sort of myth you'd like to debunk about what publishing is or who we are. Brian, do you want to go first?
Sure. I thought I'd talk about the myth of whether or not you need an agent in order to get published. And I think it's very possible there are some agents on this call, and we work with agents on a regular basis. But I do think that authors don't necessarily need an agent, at least when it comes to pitching independent publishers. Some of our most successful books that we publish both critically and commercially have come from the slush pile. And I can name books such as Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread by Francesca Quiazzi, and Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez all came in as unsolicited manuscripts without an agent. So while there are some great and thoughtful agents out there, there are others who probably wouldn't think of sending their clients' manuscripts to us in the belief that we wouldn't be able to compete with a multinational in terms of royalty advances or publicity budgets, which I think is a disservice to those authors. The fact is, in many cases where authors have published with us before getting an agent and going on to a larger press, the books that we publish actually have sold more copies, and the authors have earned more royalties than those subsequent books. So I think it's a myth that you need a big publisher and a big publishing contract in order to be successful. And I think indie presses tend to be more collaborative and hands-on with their authors, which I think is something that a lot of authors and agents don't take into consideration when assessing who they wish to publish. So I think it's a disservice to authors to for agents to accept a publisher's bid based solely on a royalty advance, because there are so many more factors that are involved and that need to be considered, from the publisher's long-term goals with that author, like, for example, what's their commitment to keeping that book in print, and the amount of input the author has in terms of editing and marketing of their book.
Myth one debunked. Nurjehan, what would you like to have everybody know about publishing?
Well, the myth that you will make a lot of money with publishing, and that's just not true for books published by literary presses. You publish because you want your book to be published, and that should be the goal in itself. And then, just leave the promotion up to the publishers. But to think that, you will make a lot of money, that's just not true. I mean, you're happy if about 700 copies get sold in a couple of years. That's the reality, and that's the situation. The books that actually make money are the celebrity titles. For instance, Michelle Obama, and there's no way that we as small publishers can compete with that. But, we just do the service of publishing literary titles, and, all writers should be aware that, if money comes, that's great. But in itself, getting published is really the goal.
So if you want to make a dump truck full of money, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. Tori, what about you? Anything you think we should all know?
I would say that one of the biggest misconceptions that we come across is that from the time of acquisition to publication date, that we can get your book on shelves within 6 months or less. That might have been published, that might have been possible, 15 or even 10 years ago, but it's just not realistic these days. At TouchWood, we try to acquire at least a year in advance, but we do prefer to try and acquire 18 months in advance. And this is for a number of reasons, but I'm going to give you 3 big ones that are important to us at TouchWood. Firstly, we need to allow for the time and the effort required for the production and creation of the book. So that's at least 4 months. We would like to have 6 months. It's not always possible. And to some extent, we're also beholden to the schedules set by the printing companies that we're working with. During the pandemic, shockingly, these schedules, reached up 4, 5, 6 months. And we're very lucky now that after the pandemic, we're back down to about 3 months. And if you're printing offshore, we have to allow at least 3 months for the printing of your book and the shipping back to Canada. If we're printing within Canada, we are allowing at least 6 weeks, sometimes 5, but we like to allow for 6. And the third thing is that we have to take into account that bookstores, especially Indigo, they actually start purchasing books from our reps 6 months in advance of the publication date. So we want to give our reps the advantage of having a mostly packaged book when they're sitting in on those buyers meetings to give your book the best chance to be purchased by booksellers and Indigo especially. So really, to sum it up, if you send in a submission today or following this panel, just please don't expect to see it on shelves by the summertime or even by Christmas. It would be probably next spring.
Or even for us to be able to make a decision in the next few months. Yeah. Robin, what do you think we should know?
Some people think that, especially new authors, they think that their book will draw attention right away. Or even other authors, I think you can draw attention. And the point I'd like to make is that there's no secret to drawing attention. Lightning can strike once. We had it where the book was a bestseller, it was a Giller finalist, but it won't strike twice in the same place a second time. So, it's something that you cannot predict. And there's also problems with newspapers. The newspapers are nobody reads them anymore, hardly. If they do, they read them a bit online. The newspapers have reduced the number of pages devoted to books, number of articles to books. The book sellers buy fewer books, purchase fewer books now. We hit a low in the 2015s about when there were very few independent bookstores. People don't go and browse the way they used to, but there is a revival, and that's encouraging. But there's just no way. And another thing is that there are flavors of the day. You might be writing very good books, but the reviewers, the jurors and jurors may think, well, that's not something we're like these days. Now, we don't try and follow those flavors of the month. We try, and we have a certain kind of book we like, and we know how to get them out, and we know how to get them purchased. But there's no secret to that, that kind of success or being seen, being discovered. It is a real challenge for us. And sometimes you need to kickstart with launches. That's why we have individual launches to try and get the book out. And the word of mouth, by the way, is the best way that a book gets around. So you have to get it out quickly into lots of people's hands. So.
An excellent point. And Graham, what would you like? What myth would you like to debunk?
Well, this is my book. It doesn't need any editing. It's perfect. I've been working on it for however long, and it's perfect. So please publish it as is. I can speak from my own experience as a writer, and having gone through the Alkin Center's creative writing program, that it can be heartbreaking to hear feedback about your perfect text. So it's really important that you. I mean, it's important to trust your editor, and it's essential for your publisher to be able to provide you with a good match as well. Sometimes there can be personality conflicts and disagreements, it's part of. I mean, that's just life in general. And sometimes sometimes the publisher will need to step up and see if they can find another match. It's happened in our history. And we still were able to make a brilliant project. The author was happy. I mean, that's really where we stand. We try and keep our authors as happy as possible and encapsulate the original voice as much as possible as well. It isn't always possible, as lenient as even some of our we shouldn't say lenient, but we've adjusted our standards to allow for real speaking voices and dialects and stuff to come through without changing the diction and making it proper English. But yeah, you have to trust your editor, and it also helps to even shop your manuscript around between, not really shop, but pass around between friends, have other people look at it and get their opinion, and then let the professionals do the same.
I think everyone here would agree with all of that. And last of all, Jared, what would you like us to know?
What a great list, like an incredibly helpful series of things to think about. One of the things that's been on my mind a lot lately is like, especially for debut authors, kind of what is your notion of success? What does success look like? And so often we see people who go through the process that we're talking about tonight and who do many of the steps that my colleagues here on the call have just talked about. And then, you want your book to explode. You want it to hit the top of the bestseller list and to be an instant phenomenon. And, sometimes that happens, or sometimes it doesn't happen. And then 6 months later, it's on the Giller Prize shortlist, and then it happens. Like, there's all sorts of different ways. But one of the things I'm always trying to encourage our authors to remember is that, success looks like all different kinds of things, and success can take a long time. Brian mentioned earlier, like, a publisher's commitment to keeping a book in print, and the number of times that we've all seen a book that's been in print for a long time and it has had perhaps like a modest life or track record all of a sudden click and speak to a particular moment in the culture, or get on Book Talk or whatever it may be, and all of a sudden blow up. So I think just like, to the extent that you're able to keep a longer view of success itself and keep a sense of optimism for the potential of any one of your books in the future, it's always a good idea. Alana, I don't know if you're watching the chat, but like, everybody wants you to also speak to Coach House. So I feel obligated as a chat minder to ask you to give a quick summary of Coach House.
Well, I'm here as a moderator, not as a panelist.
The people want what they want. I don't make the rules.
The people want what they want. I'm the editorial director of Coach House Books, and we publish literary fiction, poetry, some nonfiction. My cat is co-hosting. And we had the pleasure of winning the Giller Prize last fall for Suzette Meyer's The Sleeping Car Porter. So yeah, so that's why I'm here. But enough about me. I imagine that a lot of you in the audience are here because you have a manuscript that you'd like to think about publishing. And coincidentally, we all love finding great books to publish. So you're in the right place. But I will say that all of us get a lot of submissions, like maybe an impossible number of them. And we have to make a lot of very difficult decisions. So to me, there's always a bit of an alchemy to the decision to publish a book. Can you, in one sentence, just say, each of you, sort of how you go about making those decisions? I'm sure you can't, but try. Nurjehan.
Well, first of all, the book, the manuscript has to, or the narrative has to read well. It has to have a structure, it has to have a story, and it has to appear fresh, which means that, avoid cliches. The voice has to be authentic, and it has to be something unusual, an unusual story. And given our mandate, which is to get stories from non-Western traditions, we actually get a lot of such manuscripts, which are very unusual stories. So the decision actually becomes tougher. But then, you look for the narrative and you look for freshness.
Tori, what about you?
Building on that, I can do a run-on sentence, one long run-on sentence. Adding to what Nurjehan said, we really appreciate a really well-written and thought-out proposal. We have everything on our submission guidelines that we need you to answer and provide for us with your writing sample or manuscript. But we look at acquisitions as a partnership, and your proposal is a way for you to show us who you are and how you understand who we are, what we publish, but also how you understand where your book is going to be positioned in the marketplace and how you can help us sell it. So a proposal is extremely important.
I feel like that question of reading the submission guidelines is going to come up more than once tonight. Robin.
I would say the first thing to do is to look at what the publishers publish, because especially, maybe for Penguin Random House, you do have a broad spectrum, but we have a limited number of books we publish. And for instance, we don't do science fiction. We don't do magical realism. QC fiction, yes, but that's in translation. So it's very important to when you pitch a book that you see that it would fit into the books we've published over the last 15 years or 14 years that we've been around. The other thing is that we have to really like the book. As Brian said earlier, we are also a small publisher. We are a hands-on publisher. In other words, we build a relationship with the author, and it's a long-standing relationship. We take a lot of first-time authors. We stick with them. If they want to go to another house after, fine. It doesn't bother us at all. But we will keep the books. Not all our books that have been published are still in print for 15 years. So we try and keep them going. And so I would say that we have to like the author, not in personal, personally, yes, but also their approach to literature, to what they're doing. We like to see people who are committed to what they're doing, and that have confidence in us. Well, that's it.
Jared, what makes you say yes to a book in one sentence?
I think the point about knowing as well as you can who you're pitching to is wise. And even at a big publisher, we have dozens of imprints. You can easily go and figure out what each one of them does and the types of books they publish. But actually, Alana, I was so happy to hear you use the word alchemy in your prompt or question, because that is, I think, one of the hardest aspects of it to talk about. But for me, in my career, has always been the one I try to reflect on and trust in some way. And when I look back on the books that I've acquired and edited and published that have made the biggest differences or reached the reach not even the most number of readers, but reach the readers who needed them most. There was always from the first sentence a weird sense of like a shift in energy or consciousness or connection between me and the text. And that's from writers of all sorts of different backgrounds and perspectives. So alchemy is a really good way to think about it. Like there is just a bit of magic. And I think one of the challenges for us as editors is that like we bring our own energy to the alchemical process, and like we need to bring our best selves to be present for that. And that can be hard when 90% of your life is spreadsheets, as you said earlier. So like my biggest fear is like when I disappoint a manuscript by not being a good enough a reader for it on any given day. But yeah, I loved that framing of it as alchemy. Thanks.
Graham, how about you?
Well, one word, let alone one sentence, like whoa or wow or anything that is going to draw us in. If I'm just the voice and the face of Theytus Books, we have editorial committees that are genre specific to handle all the editing and all that for us. I established the relationship and with the authors and such. However, it is absolutely essential. Draw us in. If I pick up that manuscript and I forget where I am and that I'm at work and what I'm actually doing, then that is definitely one that I'm going to put at the very top of the slush pile and recommend highly for the editorial committees to have a look at and seriously consider. So it's yeah, I mean, if you look at it like a sandwich, it's all parts are essential, but it's that upper crust that is so important. Yeah, the opening, draw us in, wow us, and you got a chance.
And Brian, is it a love connection for you too?
I would agree with what everyone said already. I think I respond best to when I have that visceral personal reaction to something I've read that I can't recall ever reading before. I had that feeling when I read Johnny Appleseed, and I had that feeling when I read Tara Maguire's memoir about the death of her son from an overdose called Holden After and Before. It's that sense of daring and even that sense of weirdness that I find really bracing and invigorating. And those are the kinds of books that I'm personally drawn to, and those are the books that we want to be publishing.
It warms my heart to hear that it's still love that makes everyone choose a manuscript.
Absolutely.
Robin, what's one thing that you think people should do before they start sending out their manuscript?
Sometimes they can get an editor. I mean, maybe they do already, but it like get somebody who they know and to go over it with them. Somebody who not just a yes woman or a yes man, it's going to be critical of them. And the other thing is, as I said earlier, I'll repeat it, look at what people are publishing and see if you fit in there.
So do your research and read the submission guidelines. I think, again, we're going to return to those. Is there anything else anyone else wants to add to that subject of what you should do to prepare? I think, Tori, you touched a little bit on, the idea of making a proposal for nonfiction. Yeah, Jared? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Tori.
I was just going to say my answer was exactly the same as Robin's. You got to do your research and have someone read it before you send it to us.
Mine is read a lot of books. I'm often surprised still by the number of queries or manuscripts I'll get from people who will often even admit within their cover letter that they haven't read widely in the space, but they really had something they felt they needed to say in this area or whatever. And like, I just don't think, I mean, there are always like geniuses who are exceptions, but I just don't think most people are going to be able to write a very good book without understanding deeply the work that's come before and the work that's being done now. So I think read a lot. And then if you think you want to write a book, read some more and then write a book.
Yeah, I agree with Jared. And I read as much as possible, have a broad reading. I would also like to add that if you do get an outside freelance editor to have a look at your manuscript before submitting, you have to be a little bit wary because many times the editors can, edit in such a way that your voice is lost, your authenticity is lost. So, be wary about that. But it is generally a good idea to have minimal editing done and have the manuscript looked at before sending it in.
Right, I
And
just
spell
like-
check at the very least.
just like one thing, I would say to prospective authors, learn how to describe your book verbally. Because if you get past the stage of actually getting noticed by a publisher, then you want to be able to defend your story. And that's always very important. That can be more convincing than a written letter.
Brian, other than writing a good book, what is something that a potential submitter can do to get your attention?
I think one thing that I respond to is whether or not they mention any of our existing titles as potential comps to their own book, assuming that those comps are legitimate and meaningful. Because I think, for one thing, it does underscore the fact that they've looked at our website or they're familiar with us as a publisher, and that they feel their book is compatible with our list. And also, I think it's just a good sense, as has already been talked about, that you know where your book fits in the world in terms of other similar kinds of books, so, which I think is really, really important. Yeah.
On the other hand, Tori, what do you find really off-putting in a submission?
I don't think this is an original answer. I think this is probably a pet peeve of everyone on the panel, but please don't compare your book to like the next memoir by like Prince Harry's memoir or The Hobbit or Anne of Green Gables. Those comparisons don't work for us because those books, yours, I'm sorry, isn't going to reach those highs. It's just not. And it also kind of gives us the impression that you don't understand the marketplace and you don't really understand what you're bringing to the table. You don't understand how we work in Canadian publishing, and also that your expectations are really high. And that also kind of gives me the idea that what we are able to do, which is truly impressive, is still not going to be good enough for what you're planning. And even if you don't mean that, even if you're like, well, this, Prince Harry's memoir did great, and I have so much confidence in what I've written, it's like, the next amazing memoir, that's not how it comes off. It comes off a little arrogant and even a little bit delusional. So please don't include stuff like that.
Anybody have anything else they find sort of a pet peeve in submissions?
I would say don't include your bank information so that we can deposit your advance directly, which has actually happened.
I would like to add, I really, second what Tori just said. I would also like to add that please don't send first drafts, raw drafts, do please revise, a few times before sending it in so that it's readable. And many times we get manuscripts that are completely in the raw, and that's quite off-putting.
Now we know, Brian, how you feel about agents. The rest of you, do you prefer to work with or without agents? Robin?
Yeah, we prefer not to. Mainly because it is a collaborative effect. I'm an author as well. We published the books published in French and in English, and it is a bit of a privilege to get your book published. And so we think that if agents, what they'll try and do is really try and up the ante. They probably might have convinced their author that they can get a big advance and all this. So we say, if you have an agent, go and look elsewhere. It's as simple as that. I mean, we would do with an agent, but we have to have a close relationship with that agent, so they understand our problems as well. Like somebody talked about you talked about getting 700 books published. Printed, sold. That's like you might say it's an average for some fiction. That's even a high average, I would say. Sometimes they don't even get that high. So every time we take on a book, it's a risk for us as well. And we might do well, we might not. We'll do a good job, but we might not get the book sold in millions.
It's probably different for everybody, whether you prefer an agent or without an agent. Depends, from my perspective, it depends what it is that you're publishing and whether you think that it is, where it belongs, right? Jared, I suspect you work with agents a lot more than
Yeah.
us.
And just on to add to what Robin said, I mean, I also would rather not deal with agents. We're a small company and our ante isn't very high. And our authors are everything to us. The copyright is sacred and it is always theirs. We only borrow it to publish, to print a line of books. But having said that, we have a brilliant unnamed author who came to us from television production, and with him came that agent. So sometimes it just happens, and we were fortunate that that agent is able to have that working relationship with us, where the author can grow, and we can all move together. And we've actually published a couple of books by this unnamed author, so it's gone well. But yeah, hardballing the smaller companies, I think would be a waste of time. And like Robin said, if you have an agent and you're shooting for the sky, go big.
I think, Alana, I do work with agents a lot, probably more than some of our colleagues on the call. I mean, to me, it's like anything. They're great agents and they're kind of less great agents. There are even some bad agents you'd rather not deal with. But a really good agent, I think, is kind of what Graham just described, which is someone who shares your investments in the career and nurturing and development of the writer, and who can be a collaborative partner in the long-term planning and vision. I talk to agents about well, I'll talk with an author and an agent about what are we going to do next? What is your book after that? How do we develop and move toward that? And how do we, as your agent, as your publisher, as your editor, whatever it may be, support you in the development of that career vision and path? So, I mean, I started my career at House of Anansi, and we preferred not to work with agents there. I now work with agents a lot, but not always. I definitely have authors who are unagented. I will say that a really great agent can be a resource to both publisher or editor and author when things get hard. The truth is that even the most, I think Robin just said it well, sometimes we'll do our job really well and a book still won't work. And it is a fickle marketplace sometimes. Sometimes we'll do our job not so well and a book won't work, or it will work. But there are moments when we've all tried our best and put our hearts into it and something doesn't come to pass in the way we want. And an agent can be a really compassionate support and guide to an author through that particular disappointment. And sometimes for an author, it's really nice to have somebody to give bad news or have difficult conversations on their behalf. I've often seen that with friends of mine who are authors, how much they value their agent being able to call their publisher and talk about something awkward that they don't want to deal with. So there are upsides. And I think in Canada, at least, the hardballing of publishers from agents is perhaps less common than it is in some of the bigger markets around the world.
So let's say we're going to jump ahead and let's say that your manuscript is accepted. What is one thing that each of you wishes that an author would know ahead of time about the publication process? Just super quick.
I could start.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine actually once attended a conference where the speaker likened every new book that we acquired to a kind of a startup company, a startup business. And I thought that was a really clever metaphor because it's true. Every single book that we acquire and every new author partnership that we have requires something different from us. We have a different team of editorial freelance staff that works on it. We sometimes have different designers that work on it. Sometimes there's an agent involved. The authors are sometimes really hands-on. Sometimes they're totally please just do whatever you want with my book, which is great. All of that is great. But what might work for one book might not work at all for another one. So for instance, our highest selling cookbook at TouchWood doesn't even really sell through bookstores. We tried very, very hard to get it sold into its niche market, and we didn't really put a lot of effort into getting media or selling it into bookstores. And that book sells like hotcakes, but that method would not work for most books. It pretty much only works for that book. But it just is to say that every single book is different. Every plan that we do is different. All the people that work on your book might be different. And you can't always expect something that works for, you know, your friend that gets published at one company might work for your book that's published at our company.
And on that note, as an Indigenous publisher, of course, we're looking to promote emerging and established Indigenous voices. So do the research a little bit before you submit the publication. Find out. Like, I always go find out what the submission guidelines are and find out what the publisher stands for and what kinds of books they publish and what kinds of authors they publish. Yeah, I mean, it's.
What I like, if we've accepted a title, I like to go over the whole process until the pub date, and they get a clear idea that, you know, any corrections they're going to accept and or, you know, reject. It's up to them at the different stages. You know, when the still a manuscript, then it's laid out, and then the ARCs, the advanced reading copies. I like, because they don't often, new writers particularly, don't know that process. So that's very important.
So it's 7:41, and in about 5 minutes, we're going to start answering some of the questions. So it's sort of your last chance to put some questions in the Q&A, although I see we have a lot and won't be able to get through them all, but we'll try our very best. We'll do speed round. But before we do that, I just want to ask one last question. So as editors, our job is to like find fault in things. That's what we do. So publishers aren't always the most like sunshine and rainbows people, but we're also what I like to call serial optimists. So every book we have the highest hopes and the biggest dreams for. So from the perspective of a serial optimist, can you each tell me one thing that you're feeling really positive about, and maybe the title of one book that you're in love with right now, whether it's something you're publishing, something you're reading that you're not publishing, something that you wish you were publishing. Graham.
Holy.
One thing you're positive about and one book.
COVID is, well, it's not over, but things are opening up. Bottlenecks are disappearing. We can start printing books one after the other, as long as we can arrange for book designers. It's wonderful. And we're publishing in Silchin. We've never published educational language specific guides before for the Insilchin language of the host nation, the Syilx. So we're very excited about that. We've got 2 pocket dictionaries coming and an educational resource guide to go with it. And there's language schools popping up all up and down the valley. So we're hoping it gets out there and more Indigenous nations will come and help us to develop provide text to help them to develop their language programs as well.
Nurjehan.
Well, you know, once in a while you find a gem of a book, you know, where everything works. You know, it's really a good story, even though it doesn't sell in huge numbers and doesn't win many prizes or even one prize, but it's a book that you feel really happy about. And that makes it all worthwhile. And I will just give an example of one title we published recently, which is, I'll just hold it up. It's called Mina Among the Shadows. And it's a translation from the French, published in Quebec in original French and translated by Phyllis Aronoff and Howard Scott in Quebec. And it's really a beautiful story set in West Africa, you know, protagonist going back to his old country and seeing things changed. And he's really in pursuit of his muse, whom he finds at last, but after a lot of searching. It's a beautifully told story, and it brings in a lot of art into the scene, and there is love. So we feel really happy about this book.
Great. Jared.
Yeah, I'm thinking about real reasons for optimism kind of person most days. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is just like the particular dynamics of the Canadian retail marketplace. Like, we're all very lucky to publish books in Canada, as difficult as it is still on most days, because we have an incredibly variegated and rich retail infrastructure with all sorts of different pathways for books, and it's growing and changing all the time as audio grows and there's new ways of telling stories and delivering stories. So that has me feeling really excited. And a book that I'm especially excited about, I just grabbed this off my desk because I started reading it this morning by Feroz Farrokhzad, an Iranian poet. It's called Let Us Believe in the Beginning of the Cold Season. She died in the 60s, I believe, and this is sort of like the first English translation of a lot of her work. New Directions published it last year, and it really knocked my socks off this morning. So it's top of mind. Yeah, it's a great book.
Well, you should put your socks back on. It's cold. Robin.
It's a tough question, you know. I could say the best book that I've read recently is Frantu Maglia of Elena Ferrante, A Writer's Journey. I highly recommend it for prospective writers because it talks about the fiction, not anonymity, fiction writers' absolute requirement to tell the truth. Anyway, and she deals with the question of success and so on. It's a great book, but I should talk about some of the books we're putting out, because as I think, not sure who said, every book, we publish small enough numbers of books that we love every one. We're really keen on them, and I put them here. This was a big prize.
Just one, Robin, just one.
Okay, Everything is Ori, translated by David Warner from Penticton, BC. It won the Robert Cliche Award. There's other ones here you can look at as we go on.
And I would also
I
would invite you all to look at the websites of all of these amazing publishers, because there's so many great books. So please do some browsing. Tori.
I have been in publishing for about a decade, but I'm actually a newly appointed publisher. I've been acting publisher at TouchWood for almost 2 years now, but I'm newly appointed publisher, and I'm really just excited and grateful to be in the position where I can help authors bring their books to life. Also, I'm really excited about the resurgence of independent bookstores. They seem to be coming back from a low that they have been in the last maybe 10 to 15 years. So I'm excited to see new independent bookstores popping up. And the book that I'm reading right now is called Frequently Asked White Questions by AJ Parasram and Alex Krasnabish, I believe is how you pronounce his name. It was published by Fernwood Publishing in Nova Scotia. And I'm really excited about all of our fall and spring titles coming up too.
Great. And Brian.
It's not the word, excited is not the word, but I'm just always continually amazed at the power of the books that we publish. Not we, meaning all of us in Canadian publishing, the power that our books have to make conscious change in our society, especially, to use one example, the ongoing war over trans rights in America that we've seen happen over the last 6 months. And I'm just very moved by the work that our trans authors have done in creating change, societal change. A book that we're really pleased to bring back into print is a Safe Girl to Love by Casey Plett. This is the third book with Casey that we published, and Casey is just a beautiful, kind, empathetic writer. And we're very, very proud of writers like Casey and writers like her.
That is a great note to end this part of the conversation on. And to note that Casey was the chair of the jury for the Scotiabank Giller Prize last year.
Right.
So now I'm going to try to wade through the Q&A. We'll just do like lightning round questions. Slush piles. We didn't talk that much about them. Anyone want to say anything about? I mean, I know for us, we actually look at the slush pile. I think all of us do pay attention to what's there. Anyone want to chime in?
I can. I just wanted to say that we talked a lot about agented submissions, but we go through our submissions inbox as much as we do receive agented submissions, and we give all of the manuscripts that we receive the same kind of consideration. So we really do count on our slush pile, and we appreciate all the submissions.
Seeing some nods.
We also appreciate the patience of writers in waiting for the response, because we do try to respond between 2, 3, 4 months, but inevitably the piles pile up. But we do our best.
As
I
to-
say I'm sorry that if we don't get back to you in time, or if we don't get back to you, we get like everybody here, probably at least 1 or 2 submissions a day in the year, and you can't do the rest of your work and answer. So I'm very sorry for Baraka Books that we cannot reply in time, and sometimes we don't even get a reply out. I'm sorry.
How important is it if you're trying to sell a first novel? How important is it to have some short stories published ahead of time? Should you focus on getting the novel written, or should you focus on getting some stories published elsewhere?
Well, practice makes perfect, and there's always a possibility that you can get those short stories published in an anthology, and therefore gain some experience of the and some knowledge of the industry. So yeah, I mean, there's no harm in doing both, and both at the same time, for that matter.
Further to that, how would you suggest pitching a short story collection, given that there's the rumor has it they're harder to sell?
We publish short stories on a regular basis. We welcome them, like we welcome novels. And we don't see any difference in marketing the short stories, compared to the novels. So we do tend to go for them.
Okay, here's a toughie. Someone want to tackle defining literary fiction as opposed to fiction, contemporary fiction, and commercial fiction. Not to mention upmarket fiction, women's fiction, all the other. Anyone want to tackle that? I think it's what you want it to be.
Yeah, I think it's what you want it to be. That's a good way of putting it. And I think it's a distinction that perhaps like matters in the sense that you might apply a BISAC code, like a descriptor code to a book. But I think increasingly it matters less and less. And like so much good writing in this country and elsewhere is invested in dismantling those distinctions anyway. So don't sweat it too much is my advice. Just write what you think is great.
Many of you want authors to cite books that are like ours. The poster says that they understand that, but it's discouraging. Asking if you're open to novels that explore new themes or situations that have not been addressed. Anyone want to tackle that?
I would say that that's great. We are always looking for something new and exciting and a new marketable angle. But I would I would warn you against saying, like my book is uncategorical. We need a category. We need to sell it. It needs to be on a shelf in a bookstore. It needs to have a BISAC. And if you can't give us an idea of what this book is, like if say it's a mystery or a thriller or, women's fiction, it needs to have at least one tag, as Jared was saying, to be put on a shelf in a bookstore. And if you can't tell us what it is, it's going to make it all that much harder for us to sell it. So the comps that you can provide for us are just going to help us sell it better. And it's going to help more people find your book online or in stores.
And our representatives in the United States and in Canada demand, and that's a demand, you have comp titles. At IPG in the States, you cannot submit a book without submitting a comp title from the last 5 years. So it's understandable because they want to be able to tell the bookseller, this book is like this one. And I agree with Tori when she said, don't compare it to Prince Harry.
How much of a novel manuscript would you typically read before knowing if it's a yes or a no?
I saw that question come in and I was like, oh, that's one I would love to hear people answer. Sometimes within the first 10 words. Sometimes within the first 50 pages. Like it really, I mean, I think
really
the more you do it, the faster you get at it, but sometimes they surprise you. Brian, you find the same?
Oh yeah, I mean, it depends from proposal to proposal. Sometimes you will know right away, and sometimes you'll read 100 pages before you realize it's not quite right for us.
We will read the whole book before we actually decide. I mean, like you can tell when you're getting into it, I like this, but I like to go right through. or that there's no curveballs at the end, or totally, you know, things that we don't want to publish. But I agree, and within a, you know, like 10 pages or 100 pages, you can pretty well get an idea.
I'm going to apologize. We're not going to get through all these questions because there's a lot of them. I think we're at 90 currently. So I'm just trying to pick through the ones that we can probably answer quickly. A lot of the information that you're asking about is in people's submission guidelines. And you're also, you know, you can write to each press individually. I'm sorry that we can't quite tackle all of it. Can you discuss the benefits of pursuing Canadian publication versus American?
We're Canadian publishers, so we want to publish in Canada.
Right.
We want to publish Canadian authors, and we want to put work into the Canadian marketplace so Canadian people can read your work. We do also distribute through the US through a publisher, or sorry, through a distributor in the US. So we do have representation down there, but we would like to publish your manuscript in Canada.
When we publish, oh, sorry, go ahead, Graham.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, I was just going to say, when we take on a book, we acquire at least North American rights. 60% of our sales are in the US market, and we do a lot to support that market. So it's really important, because Canada is such a small country. It's really important for us to have at least Canada and the US.
And that's the case for us as well, that we try and acquire at least North American rights, if not world rights.
Yeah, and likewise. And we have funding from provincial and federal governments that ask us to focus on Canadian and BC writers specifically. So yeah, but we will market your book throughout North America. It's absolutely essential.
We touched on this a bit before, but is there anything that's really clearly a make or break in a submission letter? Lightning round, 2 words.
I was laughing thinking back to Brian's banking information story.
I could say if it's very obvious that it's just a mass email out to publishers and there's no information other than just a document and hi, this is my name, publish my book, please call me when you're ready. Because we do get those, and that just doesn't inspire me at all.
I read a query letter within the last few weeks that was so astonishingly good as a piece of writing itself. It made me think like, oh yeah, we don't even some of like our best writers, I'm sure, like think of it as a functional form, right? Like you are writing to ask if someone will consider something. And like, they're always well written if it's a good writer writing it, but thinking about a way to make it its own work of art or its own demonstration of your skills and abilities as a writer, like it can really, I mean, it might not work for everybody, but that one really like shocked my attention right away for sure.
There are a lot of questions about formatting, you know, typeface, that kind of thing. That stuff probably doesn't matter to most of us, but if it does, it'll say in the submission guidelines. So I'm not going to answer those questions.
I might just say the cleaner it is and the more reader friendly it is, the better it is. The word double space, you know, just because on screen or in paper, you know, you want people to be able to read it.
There's a few questions about self-publishing. I think all of us receive a lot of submissions for books that have previously been self-published. Is that a no-go for you, or is that something you would consider if it's already been out?
Absolutely, but bear in mind, it's not self-publishing anymore, so there's going to be other voices and other opinions involved, and to be open to those and not be don't make sure that you're not going in with you know, with your hackles up, ready to defend your work. Be open to having things tweaked or shifted a little bit here and there, and yeah, and it's all for the benefit and the success of your book.
We're at 7:59. So does anybody have any last words they would like to share? I know that we would all love to publish all of you. That may not happen. But any sort of parting words of wisdom from the panel before we, and I'm really sorry that we couldn't answer more questions. There are so many, and so many of these are like a full hour conversation on their own, talking about contracts and marketing and things like that. So I'm sorry that we could not get to them, but any parting words from the yeah, Graham says call him, so everybody call Graham. Any last thoughts from any of our panelists?
Don't give up.
Sorry, Robin.
Don't give up. That's
Yeah.
what I say to them. I mean, you know, it's probably valuable what you've written, and you know, be patient. You'll find somebody.
Mhm. Remember Stephen King? His first successful manuscript was fished out of the wastebasket by his wife after so many disappointments and rejections from publishers. And look at him now.
Yeah,
Scary.
patience is a good one.
I would add that it's never too late to start writing or start shopping on a manuscript. We worked with an incredible author who was actually longlisted for the Giller. His name's Brian Thomas Isaac. His book was All the Quiet Places. He didn't submit until he was 70. So he's, you know, just keep trying, as everybody has said, but it's never too late to submit a manuscript.
Well, thank you all for your words of wisdom. Hope it's helpful to our audience to hear the inside scoop on how we manage our submissions. Daphne, over to you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, everyone, for lending us your time and your talent tonight. I think you can tell by the number of questions, now over 100, what an absolutely fabulous and fascinating conversation. And to our listeners tonight, I'm going to do something very different because we did have such an unprecedented number of questions. Here, our Giller team will save all those questions and we'll put them to our panelists in writing. And so maybe we can get most of them answered and we'll send them back to you in a blog or look on our website for postings. So thank you so much. I've learned a great deal. I know that our audience has. So again, thank you for anyone out there who's missed tonight's event or knows somebody who by unfortunate circumstances has missed it. It will be available on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days. And please check back on our website for news about upcoming power panels and also our book clubs. Thank you again for joining us and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Good night.
All right.